I never imagined that after dedicating 8 years of my life to transforming my mother's struggling textile business into a $90 million empire, she would look me straight in the eye and say, "Morgan will be taking over as CEO now, not you." Those words hit me like a freight train as I stood in my mother's corner office, clutching the business proposal I'd spent weeks perfecting, a proposal that would have taken our company global. Now, I held in my hands not just a stack of papers, but the shattered remains of everything I'd believed about my place in both our family and the business I'd poured my heart and soul into. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The conference room fell silent as I stared across the polished mahogany table at my mother, Catherine Hayes, impeccably dressed in one of her signature charcoal suits, not a silver hair out of place. Beside her sat my younger sister Morgan, wearing an expression that wavered between triumph and discomfort. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too calm for the hurricane raging inside me. "It's been decided," my mother repeated, shuffling the papers in front of her with manicured fingers that betrayed no tremor. "Morgan will assume the role of CEO effective next month. You'll transition to Chief Innovation Officer, reporting to Bay. Her." I glanced down at my business proposal, the culmination of months of research, international partner meetings, and sleepless nights. The expansion plan that would transform Hayes Textiles from a national success into a global powerhouse. And this decision was made without consulting me, the person who's been running day-to-day operations since Dad died. I placed my palms flat on the table to steady myself. Morgan at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, fidgeting with her pen as she avoided my gaze. My mother, however, remained unmoved. "This isn't personal, Vanessa. It's what's best for the company." I nearly laughed at the absurdity. "Not personal? Mom, I took over when we were on the verge of bankruptcy. I've grown Hayes Textiles from a $3 million struggling family business to $90 million in revenue. I've created jobs for over 200 people. How is this not personal?" My mind flashed back to 8 years ago, standing in this same conference room, but then with peeling wallpaper and outdated furniture. Dad had just passed away suddenly from a heart attack, leaving behind a company drowning in debt. Mom had been lost, adrift in grief and business decisions she'd never had to make during the 30 years Dad had run everything. Morgan had been finishing her MBA at Wharton then, theoretical knowledge with no practical application. I'd left my promising career at Bergman Industries to come home and save the family business. Not because I had to, but because I couldn't bear to see my mother lose everything after already losing the love of her life. "Your contributions are valued, Vanessa," my mother said, her tone softening slightly. "That's why we want you to focus on what you do best: innovation and design. Morgan has the financial acumen this company needs for its next phase." Morgan finally spoke up. "Van, this makes sense if you think about it. You're brilliant with product development and creative direction. I'm better with numbers, strategic planning, and investor relations." "Better?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "I've managed our finances for 8 years. I've quadrupled our profit margins. I've secured our largest contracts." "And you've done a commendable job," my mother interjected. "But Morgan's expertise will take us further. Her Harvard Business Review article on textile industry optimization was groundbreaking." "An article," I said flatly. "You're comparing theoretical models to 8 years of proven results." Morgan's cheeks flushed. "It wasn't just an article. My dissertation on sustainable business scaling has been implemented by 3 Fortune 500 companies." I looked between them, these 2 women who were my closest family, suddenly feeling like a stranger. "So all this time, while I've been rebuilding this company brick by brick, working 18-hour days, missing holidays and birthdays and any semblance of a personal life, you've been planning to hand it over to Morgan?" "It wasn't like that," Morgan protested. but my mother raised a hand to silence her. The decision is made, Vanessa. I'm still the majority shareholder, and this is what I believe is best for Hayes Textiles' future. She glanced at her watch. Now, we have a board meeting in 20 minutes. I expect you to present your expansion proposal professionally without allowing this personal matter to interfere. Personal matter. As if my life's work could be reduced to a personal matter. I gathered my proposal slides with steady hands that belied the trembling inside me. I'll present, but not as Chief Innovation Officer. If I'm not good enough to lead this company after everything I've done, then I'm not staying to watch someone else take credit for my work. Don't be dramatic, my mother said, her tone sharpening. No one is taking credit for your work. This is a strategic business decision. Then I'll make a strategic personal decision, I countered, standing up. After the board meeting, I'll be submitting my resignation. Morgan's eyes widened. Vanessa, you can't just leave. The Shanghai contract needs your expertise. The new sustainable fabric line is your vision. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. Morgan had always been the golden child, the one with the prestigious degrees and the perfect life plan, while I had been managing inventory crises and negotiating with angry creditors. She had been collecting accolades and building her theoretical business expertise. I couldn't even hate her for it. We had simply walked different paths. But this felt like betrayal from both of them. You wanted to be CEO, Morgan. Figure it out. I turned to my mother, whose composure had finally cracked, showing a flash of alarm. You always said Dad built this company on integrity and loyalty. I wonder what he would think of this decision. My mother straightened, her momentary vulnerability vanishing. Your father would understand practical business decisions. He didn't let emotions cloud his judgment. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad had always said I was just like him, stubborn, passionate, with an instinctive feel for the business. Morgan had been the one who approached everything with clinical precision, just like our mother. Without another word, I walked out of the conference room, my proposal clutched to my chest. I made it to my office, the office that would soon be Morgan's, before the first tear fell. 8 years of my life, 8 years of sacrifice, innovation, and relentless work. And in the end, it meant nothing compared to Morgan's prestigious credentials and our mother's inexplicable favoritism. I wiped away the tear before it could fall on my proposal. There would be time for grief later. Right now, I had a board meeting to get through. And after that, I would have to figure out who Vanessa Hayes was outside of the company that had become my identity, my purpose, and my greatest achievement. Only to be taken away in a single, devastating moment. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The boardroom of Hayes Textiles looked nothing like it had 8 years ago. Gone were the faded leather chairs and water-stained ceiling tiles. Now, 12 executives sat around a gleaming conference table in ergonomic chairs, beneath recessed lighting that highlighted the award-winning textile samples displayed in glass cases along the wall. Every detail in this room, from the eco-friendly bamboo flooring to the digital presentation system, had been my decision, my vision brought to life. And now I was about to present my final proposal as if nothing had changed. The Asian market represents our greatest opportunity for expansion, I said, clicking to the next slide as board members nodded appreciatively. My voice remained steady, professional, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside. The Shanghai facility would increase our production capacity by 40%, while reducing our carbon footprint by implementing the sustainable processes we've pioneered here. From the corner of my eye, I could see Morgan taking meticulous notes, her expression studious. Our mother sat at the head of the table, watching me with an unreadable expression. I wondered if she was regretting her decision yet, or if she was simply counting the minutes until she could announce Morgan's ascension to the board. The numbers speak for themselves, I continued, displaying the projected revenue charts that had taken weeks to compile. Initial investment of $12 million, with projected returns of $30 million by year 3. We've already secured preliminary agreements with 3 major Chinese retailers and 2 European fashion houses interested in exclusive access to our sustainable luxury textiles. Board member Diane Fletcher leaned forward. This is impressive work, Vanessa. Particularly the relationship you've built with the Chinese regulatory authorities. That's notoriously difficult territory. Thank you, I replied, allowing myself a small smile. It took 18 months of relationship building, but we now have expedited approval processes in place. And who would oversee this expansion? Asked Martin Chen, our newest board member who represented our largest outside investor. This seems like a project that would require your specific expertise and connections. The room fell uncomfortably silent. My mother cleared her throat. Actually, we'll be announcing some organizational changes today, she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. Morgan will be assuming the role of CEO next month. Vanessa has been offered the position of Chief Innovation Officer, where her creative talents can be better utilized. I didn't miss the careful wording. Offered, not accepted. Several board members exchanged glances. Morgan straightened in her seat, attempting to project confidence despite the obvious surprise rippling through the room. Martin frowned. No disrespect to Morgan, but Vanessa has been the driving force behind the company's remarkable turnaround. I'm not sure I understand this restructuring, especially with such an ambitious expansion on the horizon. Morgan brings fresh perspective and specialized expertise in global markets, my mother responded smoothly. Her academic background in international business management is precisely what Hays Textiles needs for this next phase. Diane's gaze shifted between my mother and me. And you support this transition, Vanessa? All eyes turned to me. This was the moment of truth. I could fight this, right here in front of the board. I could outline my accomplishments, my vision, my right to continue leading the company I had saved. I could make this messy in public, forcing a confrontation that would divide loyalties and potentially damage the company I'd worked so hard to build. Or I could maintain my dignity and walk away on my terms. I set down my presentation remote, meeting each board member's gaze. I've given 8 years of my life to Hays Textiles. When I returned, we were 3 months from bankruptcy. Today, we're industry leaders in sustainable luxury textiles with a valuation of $90 million. I'm proud of what we've built together. I paused, gathering my strength for what came next. However, I've decided to pursue other opportunities. After today, I'll be resigning from Hays Textiles. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Morgan's face paled, while my mother's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. This is unexpected, Martin said, voicing what everyone was thinking. And concerning, given the Shanghai expansion and your integral role in the company's success. I've prepared comprehensive documentation for all ongoing projects, I replied, forcing professionalism into my voice. The transition should be seamless. A lie, but a necessary one. Nothing about this would be seamless. Perhaps we should discuss this privately before making any announcements, my mother interjected, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. There's nothing to discuss, I said, gathering my materials. My decision is made. Morgan is more than qualified to lead the company forward. I wish her, and all of you, the best of success. With that, I walked out of the boardroom, ignoring the voices calling after me. My heart hammered in my chest as I strode down the hallway toward my office, past employees who had no idea their world was about to change. My assistant Julia looked up in alarm as I entered, clearly sensing something was wrong. Cancel my appointments for the rest of the week, I instructed, beginning to gather personal items from my desk. And please draft a resignation letter for my immediate review. Resignation? Julia echoed, her eyes widening. Ms. Hayes, what's happened? Before I could answer, Morgan appeared in my doorway, slightly breathless from chasing after me. Vanessa, stop. You can't just walk out like this. Watch me, I replied, continuing to empty my desk drawer. The board is in an uproar. Martin is threatening to withdraw his investment if you leave. Her voice dropped lower. Mom is furious. I looked up at my younger sister, really seeing her. For the first time in years. Morgan was brilliant, driven, and meticulously prepared for everything, except this. The confidence she'd displayed in the conference room earlier had vanished, replaced by barely concealed panic. That sounds like a CEO problem, I said, placing framed photos into a cardboard box. Congratulations on the promotion. This isn't what I wanted, Morgan said, stepping into the office and closing the door behind her. Not like this. I paused, my hand hovering over the Industry Achievement Award I'd received last year. What exactly did you think would happen, Morgan? That I'd happily step aside after 8 years and report to my younger sister who has 0 practical experience running? This company? I thought you'd see the logic, she replied, her voice smaller now. Your talents are in innovation and design. Mine are in strategic finance and global operations. It makes sense on paper. We're not on paper. This is real life, I said, the anger I'd been suppressing finally breaking through. This company isn't just a line on your resume or another achievement to add to your perfect record. It's been my whole life. I missed Dad's funeral because I was on a call with creditors trying to keep us afloat. I ended my engagement because I couldn't balance a relationship with saving this company. I've bled for Hayes Textiles. Morgan flinched, as if I'd slapped her. I know what you've sacrificed. But you've always been the martyr, Vanessa. Always had to do everything yourself, never asking for help, wearing your sacrifices like badges of honor. Maybe if you'd let me in, involved me more over the years instead of treating me like I was too inexperienced to contribute meaningfully. Don't you dare turn this around on me, I interrupted, my voice low but intense. You had every opportunity to join the company after you finished your MBA. Instead, you spent years collecting degrees and writing theoretical papers while I was here doing the actual work. Morgan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I wanted to make sure I was ready, that I had something valuable to offer beyond just being a Hayes. Unlike you, I didn't have Dad's natural business instincts. The mention of our father stopped me cold. William Hayes had built this company from nothing, with nothing but determination and an eye for quality textiles. He'd always told me I had his spirit, his intuition for business. Morgan had been the academic one, the planner, the perfectionist, like our mother. Dad would have never done this, I said quietly. He would have respected what I've built here. Morgan's expression hardened slightly. Don't speak for Dad. You don't know what he would have wanted. Neither do you, I retorted, placing the last of my personal items in the box. But I know he valued loyalty above all else, something our mother seems to have forgotten. 3 days later, I found myself sitting on the balcony of my downtown penthouse, staring at the skyline I'd barely had time to appreciate since purchasing this place. 2 years ago, my resignation letter had been submitted, my office cleared, and my company email deactivated with startling efficiency. 18 voicemails from my mother remained unanswered, along with 32 text messages from Morgan ranging from angry to pleading. I took a long sip of my Cabernet, feeling oddly hollow. For 8 years, I'd defined myself by Hayes Textiles. My days had started at 5 a.m. with international calls and ended well past midnight reviewing production reports. Weekends were for catching up on industry trends and planning strategic moves. Holidays were opportunities to work uninterrupted. I hadn't taken a vacation since before Dad died. Now, the endless stretch of unstructured time before me felt terrifying. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, not my mother or Morgan this time, but Diane Fletcher from the board. I hesitated before answering. Vanessa, thank you for picking up, Diane said, her usual polished tone tinged with concern. The board is in crisis mode. Martin has officially threatened to withdraw his investment if you leave. That's not my problem anymore, I replied, though the words lacked conviction. Isn't it? Diane challenged. You built this company back up from nothing. Are you really prepared to watch it potentially collapse because of family politics? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility I'd carried for so long. My mother made her choice, Diane. She chose Morgan. Catherine is stubborn, we all know that, Diane conceded. But this isn't just about your mother. It's about the 200 employees whose livelihoods depend on Hayes Textiles. It's about your father's legacy. A low blow, using Dad against me. Morgan has 3 advanced degrees and apparently all the qualifications my mother thinks are necessary. I'm sure she'll figure it out. You don't believe that, Diane said flatly. Morgan might be brilliant on paper, but she lacks your instincts. Your relationships with suppliers and clients, your understanding of the shop floor. The Shanghai expansion alone requires your personal connections. She wasn't wrong. The intricate network of relationships I'd built with Chinese officials and business leaders had taken years to cultivate. Morgan wouldn't be able to replicate that overnight, regardless of how many case studies she'd analyzed. What exactly are you asking me to do? I asked finally. Crawl back and accept a demotion? Report to my younger sister after 8 years as CEO? I'm asking you to consider a compromise, Diane replied carefully. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss the situation. We're considering proposing a co-CEO arrangement. I almost laughed. You can't be serious. Very serious. You would handle operations, client relationships, and product development. Your strengths. Morgan would oversee finance, legal, and strategic planning. Her strengths. Equal authority, different domains, and… My mother agreed to this? Diane hesitated. Catherine understands the board's concerns. She's considering the proposal. Translation. My mother was furious but couldn't risk losing Martin's investment. The thought gave me a bitter satisfaction that I wasn't proud of. I'll think about it, I said finally, not committing either way. After ending the call, I poured myself another glass of wine and tried to imagine sharing CEO responsibilities with Morgan. We'd be constantly stepping on each other's toes, undermining each other's decisions, competing for our mother's approval. It would be a disaster. Or would it? There had been a time, years ago, when Morgan and I had worked well together. During college, we'd collaborated on renovating and flipping a small apartment building near campus, my practical construction knowledge complementing her financial planning skills. We'd turned a tidy profit and actually enjoyed the process. But that was before Dad died, before I became the family martyr and Morgan the golden child. My doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the security camera, I saw my ex-fiancé David standing in the hallway, holding a paper bag that undoubtedly contained takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. I buzzed him up, not sure if I was annoyed or relieved by the interruption. I heard what happened, he said when I opened the door, holding up the bag. Figured you'd be holed up here not eating properly. Despite everything, I smiled. David Harrison had been a constant in my life since business school. We'd dated for 5 years and been engaged for 1 before I'd broken things off 2 years ago, unable to balance a relationship with the demands of saving Hayes Textiles. He'd understood more than most would have, and we'd maintained a friendship that defied conventional breakup wisdom. News travels fast, I said, taking the offered food and leading him to the kitchen. In textile circles? At Lightspeed. He leaned against the counter, studying me with the same intense focus that had made him one of the industry's top financial analysts. You look terrible. Thanks. You know what I mean. You look like you haven't slept in days. I shrugged, unpacking containers of pad thai and green curry. Would you sleep if your mother had just handed your life's work to your younger sister? David grabbed plates from the cabinet, familiar with my kitchen layout despite not having been here in months. Probably not, but I also wouldn't resign in a dramatic fashion without a backup plan. I shot him a look. Who says I don't have a backup plan? Do you? I didn't answer, which was answer enough. That's what I thought, he said, dishing out food. Luckily for you, I have news that might interest you. We moved to the dining table, and for a few minutes we ate in comfortable silence. David had always understood my need to process thoughts before discussing them, one of the many reasons we'd worked well together. Meridian Fabrics is looking for a new CEO, he said finally, watching my reaction. Richard Phelps is retiring next month, and their board is conducting a discreet search. I set down my fork. Meridian was Hays Textile's largest competitor, larger in fact, with operations across Europe and recent expansion into South America. They were traditional where we were innovative, conservative where we were forward-thinking. And you know how? David smiled slightly. I may have had dinner with their CFO last week. Your name came up. You didn't. I did, and they're very interested. Your transformation of Hays Textiles is legendary in the industry, Vanessa. Taking a failing family business to $90 million in 8 years? Pioneering sustainable luxury textiles when everyone said it couldn't be profitable? You're exactly what Meridian needs. I stared at him, a whirlwind of emotions swirling through me. Joining Meridian would be the ultimate revenge against my mother, Anne Morgan. I could use my industry knowledge and connections to outmaneuver Hays Textiles at every turn. Within a year, I could probably poach our best clients and suppliers. The thought made me sick. I can't do that to Dad's company, I said quietly. David reached across the table, covering my hand with his. No one's asking you to destroy Hays Textiles, but you deserve to lead a company that values you. And Meridian would give you resources beyond what Hays could ever offer. I pulled my hand away gently. I need time to think. Of course. He hesitated. There's something else you should know. Part of the reason I came tonight. The serious tone in his voice made me look up sharply. What is it? I ran into Parker Williams yesterday. The name sent a chill through me. Parker had been my father's best friend and attorney for 30 years. He'd retired shortly after Dad died, but had handled all of the Hays family legal matters, including my parents' wills, and the company succession plans. And? He asked about you, seemed concerned when I mentioned what happened at Hays Textiles. David set down his fork. He said something odd, Vanessa. He said your mother's decision didn't align with William's intentions. I froze. What does that mean? I don't know exactly, but he suggested you should visit him. Said there were things you needed to know. For the first time in 3 days, I felt a spark of something beyond anger or loss. Curiosity. What had Parker meant? Dad had been gone for 8 years. Everything had been settled, all succession plans implemented. Unless... I need to go see him, I said, already reaching for my phone. He's expecting you? David replied. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at his house on Lake Westbrook. I looked at David with newfound appreciation. Even after everything, he was still looking out for me, still fighting in my corner. Thank you, I said softly. For the food, the job leads, and this. You didn't have to do any of it. He smiled, a hint of the old warmth in his eyes. That's the thing about loving someone, Vanessa. Even when it changes form, it doesn't just disappear. As David left an hour later, promising to check, and after my meeting with Parker, I felt unsettled in a new way. Not just by the mystery of what my father's old attorney wanted to tell me, but by the realization that in my single-minded focus on saving Hays Textiles, I'd walked away from one of the few people who truly understood me. Tomorrow might reveal what my father had actually intended for the company's future. But tonight had already revealed something important about my past, and possibly my future. Some connections, once forged, never truly broke. And some betrayals, no matter how painful, might lead to unexpected new beginnings. Parker Williams lived in a modest lakeside home that belied his success as one of the city's most prominent corporate attorneys. As I pulled my car into his gravel driveway, memories flooded back. Summer barbecues with Dad and Parker arguing good-naturedly about fishing techniques. Christmas gatherings where Parker, perpetually single, had been a fixture at our family table. The day after Dad's funeral, when Parker had sat with me on his dock, both of us too grief-stricken to speak. He was waiting for me on the porch, tall and lean as ever, though his hair had gone completely white since I'd last seen him. His weathered face broke into a smile as I approached. "Vanessa Hayes," he said, embracing me warmly. "Still the spitting image of your father." "It's good to see you, Parker," I replied, genuinely meaning it. He ushered me inside to a sunlit kitchen where coffee was already brewing. The house smelled of cedar and old books, comfortingly familiar. "David said you wanted to see me," I said. Once we were settled at his kitchen table, mugs of strong black coffee between us. Something about Dad's intentions for the company. Parker studied me over his reading glasses. "I heard what Catherine did, giving Morgan the CEO position." His tone was neutral, but I could detect the disapproval beneath it. "So you know I quit." "Resigned," he corrected with a small smile. "Much more professional." I felt a rush of affection for this man who had always treated me like a surrogate daughter. "Parker, what did you mean when you told David that Mom's decision didn't align with Dad's intentions?" He sighed, removing his glasses and placing them carefully on the table. "Your father was a brilliant businessman, Vanessa, but he was also a pragmatist. He knew Catherine could be influenced by appearances, credentials, theoretical knowledge." He gave me a pointed look. He worried that in his absence, she might favor Morgan's academic approach over your practical business instincts. This wasn't exactly news. Dad and Mom had often disagreed about business approaches, with Dad relying on instinct and relationship building, while Mom preferred data-driven decisions and strategic planning. It was part of why they'd balanced each other so well as business partners. "That still doesn't explain what you meant about his intentions," I pressed. Parker rose and walked to a small home office adjacent to the kitchen. He returned with a thick manila envelope, yellowed slightly with age. "3 weeks before his heart attack, your father came to see me. He wanted to update his will and, more importantly, document his wishes for Hayes Textiles' succession." Parker tapped the envelope. He had very specific ideas about how leadership should transition after his death. My heartbeat quickened. "And what were those ideas?" "William believed you would be the one to save the company if anything happened to him. Not Morgan, not Catherine, you." He slid the envelope across the table. "He left instructions that Hayes Textiles should pass to you as CEO when you turned 35. With a clear succession plan outlined for the following 20 years. I stared at the envelope, not touching it. "I turned 35 3 months ago." "Yes. And Mom knows about this?" Parker's expression tightened. "Yes. I sent her a certified letter on your birthday, reminding her of William's wishes and the documentation we had prepared. The implications hit me like a physical blow. She deliberately ignored Dad's succession plan? She knew he wanted me to take over fully at 35, and instead, she decided to give it to Morgan. It appears so. But why wouldn't she have mentioned this to me? All these years, I've been operating as CEO in everything but official title, with her as the majority shareholder. Why not just formalize it as Dad wanted? Parker shook his head. "I can't speak to Catherine's motivations. But there's something else you should know." He tapped the envelope again. "Your father didn't just document his wishes. He created a legal mechanism to ensure they would be carried out, regardless of Catherine's decisions." My hand finally reached for the envelope. "What kind of mechanism?" "William established a trust that holds 30% of Hayes Textiles shares. Those shares were to transfer to you on your 35th birthday, making you the largest individual shareholder, larger than Catherine's 25% and Morgan's 15%. The room seemed to tilt around me as I processed this information. Are you saying I own 30% of Hayes Textiles, right now? Plus your original 10%, making it 40% total, Parker confirmed. The trust transfer happened automatically on your birthday, regardless of Catherine's acknowledgement. The paperwork was filed with the corporate registry 3 months ago. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers, scanning the legal documents inside. It was all there. The trust establishment, the automatic transfer mechanism, the explicit statement of my father's wishes that I assume full control of Hayes Textiles at 35. She lied to me, I whispered, anger building inside me. All these years, she knew Dad wanted me to lead. And then when the time came to honor his wishes, she did the exact opposite. Parker's expression was sympathetic but firm. The question now, Vanessa, is what you're going to do with this information. What? Indeed, I could march back into Hayes Textiles, documents in hand, and demand my rightful position. I could call an emergency board meeting and force a vote on leadership. I could expose my mother's deliberate subversion of my father's wishes. Or I could walk away, sell my shares for millions, and start fresh elsewhere, perhaps at Meridian as David had suggested. There's one more thing you should see, Parker said, reaching for the envelope and extracting a sealed letter with my name written on it in my father's distinctive handwriting. William asked that I give you this when the time came. I think today qualifies. I took the letter, feeling a lump form in my throat at the sight of Dad's handwriting. I hadn't seen it in 8 years, hadn't realized how much I'd missed it until this moment. I'll give you some privacy, Parker said, standing and moving toward the door. Take all the time you need. When he was gone, I carefully broke the seal on the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. My dearest Vanessa, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've reached your 35th birthday. I hope I live to see it, and that this letter is unnecessary, but experience has taught me to prepare for all contingencies. From the time you were a little girl helping me sort fabric samples in my office, I knew you had the heart and soul of Hayes Textiles in you. You understand what I built this company to be, not just a business, but a legacy of quality, innovation, and integrity. Morgan has her strengths, as does your mother, but you, Vanessa, have always been the one who truly sees my vision. I've arranged for controlling interest in Hayes Textiles to pass to you because I trust you to honor what this company stands for. But ownership is the smallest part of leadership. The true measure of a leader is not in the power they wield, but in how they use that power to elevate others. If I know your mother, she may resist this transition. Catherine loves you both deeply, but she has always worried about your impulsiveness, your willingness to take risks. She sees in Morgan a reflection of her own careful, analytical approach. Try to understand this isn't about loving one daughter more than the other. It's about different visions for the future. Whatever happens when this trust activates, remember this. Hayes Textiles was never about fabric or fashion or profit margins. It was about creating something meaningful that could unite our family across generations. If that purpose has been lost, then no legal document or ownership structure can restore it. Lead with your heart as well as your head, Vanessa. And remember that some legacies are worth fighting for, while others need to be reimagined. All my love, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Even from beyond the grave, Dad understood the situation perfectly. The different approaches Mom and I took to business, the tension between tradition and innovation, the complicated dynamics of our family. When Parker returned, I had composed myself, folding the letter carefully and returning it to the envelope. Thank you for keeping this for me, I said, gathering all the documents. And for reaching out through David. I needed to know the truth. Parker nodded. What will you do now? I stood, feeling a clarity I hadn't experienced since before that. Fateful meeting with my mother and Morgan. First, I'm going to learn exactly why my mother chose to ignore Dad's wishes. Then I'm going to decide whether Hayes Textiles is still worth fighting for. As I drove away from Parker's lakeside home, my mind was racing with possibilities and questions. Why had my mother deliberately concealed my majority ownership? What was she so afraid of that she would betray Dad's explicit wishes? And most importantly, what did I truly want for my future, and for the future of Hayes Textiles? For the first time in 3 days, I felt something beyond hurt and betrayal. I felt determined. Whatever came next, I would face it not as the wounded daughter or the ousted CEO, but as the woman my father had believed in, the rightful leader of his legacy. The Hayes family home stood on 3 acres of manicured grounds in the prestigious Lakewood Hills neighborhood, a sprawling Tudor-style mansion that had intimidated my childhood friends. Today, as I pulled through the wrought iron gates, it just looked tired. Beautiful still, but weighted with decades of family history, both spoken and unspoken. I hadn't called ahead. The element of surprise seemed necessary given what I'd learned from Parker. As I parked in the circular driveway, I noticed my mother's silver Mercedes and, unexpectedly, Morgan's Audi. Perfect. I could confront them both at once. Carmela, my mother's housekeeper of 20 years, answered the door with a warm smile that faltered when she saw my expression. "Miss Vanessa, we weren't expecting you." "That's rather the point, Carmela," I replied, softening my tone for her benefit. "Are my mother and sister here?" "In the solarium. They're discussing company matters." She hesitated. "Your mother has been distressed these past few days." I bet she has, I thought, but kept it to myself. "Thank you. I know the way." I could hear their voices as I approached the solarium at the back of the house. My mother's crisp, authoritative tone and Morgan's higher, more uncertain responses. I paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. They sat surrounded by papers and laptops, my mother gesturing emphatically while Morgan took notes. "The board is being unreasonable," my mother was saying. "Martin Chen doesn't understand that his investment came with no guarantees of personnel decisions. He's threatening to pull out completely, Mom," Morgan replied, sounding stressed. "And 3 other board members are backing him. They're insisting on this co-CEO arrangement, which is completely unworkable," my mother dismissed. "Can you imagine trying to share authority with your sister? Every decision would become a battle." I chose that moment to make my presence known. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing. They both startled, turning toward me with identical expressions of shock. Morgan recovered first. "Vanessa, we've been trying to reach you for days." "I've been busy," I replied coolly, entering the sunlit room but remaining standing. "Learning some interesting family history." My mother's eyes narrowed slightly. "What are you talking about?" I placed Parker's envelope on the glass table between us. "I visited Parker Williams this morning. He had quite a story to tell about." "Dad's succession plans?" The color drained from my mother's face. Morgan looked between us, confused. "What succession plans? What's going on?" I kept my eyes fixed on my mother. "Would you like to explain to Morgan how you deliberately ignored Dad's wishes? Or should I?" My mother's composure, legendary in business circles, cracked visibly. "That's not what happened?" "Really?" "Because according to the documents Parker showed me, Dad established a trust that transferred 30% of Hayes Textiles to me on my 35th birthday 3 months ago. Combined with my existing 10%, that makes me the majority shareholder, not you." I turned to Morgan. "Did you know about this?" Morgan's expression of genuine shock answered before she could. "What? No, Mom, is this true?" My mother stood abruptly, moving to the large windows that overlooked her prized rose garden. For a long moment, she said nothing, her rigid posture communicating volumes. "Mom?" Morgan prompted, her voice smaller now. "William was being sentimental. my mother finally said, still facing the window. He didn't understand the realities of modern business. The company needs strategic leadership, international perspective, and the kind of analytical approach that Morgan brings. That's not your decision to make, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. Dad built Hayes Textiles. It was his. To determine who should lead it. I built it too. My mother whirled around, her calm facade completely gone now. 35 years I stood beside your father, making sacrifices, offering ideas that he took credit for, smoothing relationships, when his stubborn impulsiveness created problems. Hayes Textiles isn't just William's legacy, it's mine too. Her vehemence startled me. In all my years, I'd never heard my mother speak with such raw emotion about her role in the company. She'd always presented herself as the supportive spouse, the behind-the-scenes partner happy to let Dad take the spotlight. If that's true, I said carefully, then why not tell me about the trust? Why pretend you still had controlling interest when you knew I was the majority shareholder? Morgan interjected. And why tell me I was becoming CEO if you knew? Dad wanted Vanessa to lead? My mother sank back into her chair, suddenly looking at every one of her 68 years. Because I've seen this movie before and I know how it ends. What does that mean? I asked. She sighed deeply. Your father was brilliant, Vanessa. Visionary. But his impulsiveness nearly bankrupted us 3 times during our marriage. Each time, I had to step in with careful planning and strategic restructuring to save what he'd built. She looked up at me, her eyes surprisingly vulnerable. And you're just like him. The same instincts, the same passion, the same dangerous willingness to risk everything on a hunch. Those instincts saved the company after Dad died, I pointed out. Yes, because you had no choice but to be cautious then. We were teetering on bankruptcy. But now, with the company thriving, you'd start taking the same risks he did. The Shanghai expansion is just the beginning. I stared at her, understanding dawn. You're afraid I'll ruin the company. I'm afraid you'll risk everything your father and I built on your instincts, the way he always did. She glanced at Morgan. Morgan understands the importance of careful analysis, data-driven decisions. So this was never about who was more qualified, I said slowly. It was about who you could control. My mother flinched. That's not fair, isn't it? Morgan has never challenged your decisions. She approaches business exactly as you do, cautiously, analytically. I question. I push boundaries. I take calculated risks. Just like Dad. Morgan had been silent, processing this revelation. Now she looked at our mother with new eyes. You lied to me too. You let me believe I was getting the CEO position because I'd earned it, because I was qualified. But really, you just wanted someone who wouldn't challenge your vision for the company. That's not true, Morgan. You are qualified. Your approach is exactly what Hayes Textiles needs. In your opinion, I interjected, not Dad's. And not the board's, apparently, since they're pushing for a co-CEO arrangement. Morgan turned to me, her expression a complex mixture of hurt, confusion, and something else, perhaps understanding. Did you know about this trust before today? No, I said honestly. If I had, I wouldn't have resigned. I would have called a board meeting and challenged Mom's decision directly. My sister nodded slowly, processing. Then she asked the question I hadn't fully answered for myself yet. So what happens now? What indeed? I had the legal right to reclaim my position as CEO, to implement Dad's succession plan as he'd intended. I could force my mother out of leadership entirely if I wanted to. The documents in Parker's envelope gave me that power, but Dad's letter had also emphasized that Hayes Textiles was meant to unite our family, not divide it. And looking at my mother, proud, stubborn, but also genuinely concerned about the company's future, I realized that simply asserting my legal rights wouldn't heal the breach between us. I don't know yet, I answered truthfully. But I do know this. I won't be pushed out of the company I've given 8 years of my life to rebuild. Not by you, Mom, and not by some misguided concern that I'll run it into the ground. My mother met my gaze steadily. And I won't stand by and watch you dismantle everything we've built with risky expansions and impulsive decisions. We were at an impasse, two Hayes women too stubborn to back down. It was Morgan who surprised us both by standing up and gathering the scattered papers on the table. Then maybe, she said quietly, we need to find a middle path. Because while you two fight over who should control Hayes Textiles, the actual company is in limbo. The board is revolting, Martin is threatening to pull his investment, and our employees are terrified about their future. She was right, of course. In our family power struggle, we'd all lost sight of the bigger picture. The company itself, the people who depended on it, the legacy beyond our individual claims. The board's co-CEO proposal, I said slowly. Maybe it's not as unworkable as we thought. My mother snorted dismissively. Shared leadership never works, especially between sisters with such different approaches. Maybe not between two people who don't trust each other, I conceded. But despite everything, I do trust Morgan's financial acumen. And I looked at my sister hopefully. She trusts my vision and client relationships. Morgan held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. I do. I always have, Vanessa. That's why I wanted to come back to Hayes Textiles in the first place. Not to take your place, but to work alongside you. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a glimmer of possibility. Not a perfect solution, but perhaps a workable one. A way to honor both Dad's intentions and Mom's concerns, to leverage both my strengths and Morgan's. My mother looked, between us, her expression unreadable. And where would I fit in this new arrangement? The question hung in the air, loaded with decades of history, resentment, and yes, love. Whatever happened next would determine not just the future of Hayes Textiles, but the future of our family itself. Board chair, I said after a moment's consideration. You would remain as board chair, with veto power over any major financial decisions that exceed a certain threshold. You'd be our safeguard against the kind of risks you're worried about, without micromanaging day-to-day operations. My mother tilted her head slightly, considering the proposal. And who determines that threshold? The board, Morgan interjected. Independent of all three of us. That way it's fair. I nodded in agreement, surprised and somewhat impressed by my sister's quick thinking. For the first time, I could see how her analytical mind might complement my more intuitive approach, if we could move past the events of the last few days. My mother rose and walked to the window again, her reflection visible in the glass as she gazed out at her garden. The silence stretched until I wondered if she would respond at all. William always said you had his instincts, she finally said, her voice softer than before. He was so proud of that. Our Vanessa sees around corners, he would tell me. She feels the business in her bones. She turned back to face us. What he never understood was how terrifying that was for me. His instincts nearly ruined us in 1992, again in 2001. Each time I was the one who had to clean up the mess, restructure the debt, and rebuild client relationships. I didn't know that, I admitted, seeing my mother in a new light. All these years I'd seen only her controlling nature, her preference for Morgan's approach. I hadn't considered the experiences that had shaped those preferences. No, you wouldn't. William didn't like to discuss the failures, only the successes. She sighed. When he died, and you stepped in to save the company, I saw his same patterns emerging. The bold decisions, the willingness to bet everything on a hunch. It worked, thank God, but I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. So you groomed Morgan to take over, I concluded. Someone who would be more cautious, more like you. I prepared for contingencies, she corrected. And yes, I favored Morgan's approach. But I never intended to hurt you, Vanessa. I genuinely believed I was protecting the company, and you from yourself. Morgan had been quiet, processing this family history she'd apparently never heard before either. Now she spoke up, her voice hesitant. Did Dad really establish that trust, making Vanessa the majority shareholder? My mother nodded reluctantly. Yes. Parker reminded me on Vanessa's birthday. I chose to delay implementing the changes to give us time to prepare a proper transition plan. A transition where I'd be sidelined, I pointed out, unable to keep the edge from my voice. A transition where your strengths would be utilized without giving you free rein to take uncalculated risks, my mother countered. The Chief Innovation Officer role wasn't a demotion, Vanessa. It was designed to let you focus on what you do best. While reporting to Morgan. While partnering with her. Yes. I shook my head, my anger rekindling. You can dress it up however you want, Mom. But the reality is that you deliberately ignored Dad's wishes and lied to both of us about the ownership structure of the company. Morgan intervened before our mother could respond. This isn't productive. What matters now is how we move forward. She turned to me. Vanessa, would you really consider the co-CEO arrangement? Honestly? I considered the question seriously. Could I share leadership with my sister after everything that had happened? I'd spent 8 years with complete decision-making authority, answering nominally to my mother but essentially running Hayes Textiles as I saw fit. Sharing power would require compromise, patience, collaboration, all qualities I'd had little opportunity to develop while fighting to save the company. And yet, there was something appealing about the idea. The constant pressure of being solely responsible for 200 employees and their families. The isolation of leadership. The exhaustion of always being the final decision-maker. Perhaps sharing that burden wasn't the worst idea. I could consider it, I said carefully. With clearly defined domains of responsibility and a conflict resolution mechanism that doesn't involve Mom as the tiebreaker. Morgan nodded. That seems fair. My mother looked between us, and for a moment, I glimpsed something like hope in her eyes. Then her practical nature reasserted itself. The board would need to approve any such arrangement. And what about your resignation? You made quite the dramatic exit. I can unresign, I replied dryly. Considering I own 40% of the company, I doubt the board will object. And the Shanghai expansion? My mother pressed. It's exactly the kind of risky venture I've been concerned about. Here was the real test. Could we find a compromise on actual business strategy, not just organizational structure? Expansion is necessary if we want to continue growing, I insisted. But, I added, seeing her expression harden, perhaps we could modify the approach, scale back the initial investment, expand in phases instead of all at once. Morgan jumped in. I've been reviewing the proposal, and I think there's a middle ground. What if we established a joint venture with a Chinese partner? It would reduce our capital outlay and mitigate some of the regulatory risks. I considered this. It wasn't my preferred approach. Joint ventures meant shared control and compromised vision, but it addressed my mother's primary concerns about financial exposure. I could work with that, I conceded. Assuming we choose the right partner and maintain creative control over product development. My mother's eyebrows rose slightly. You'd actually compromise on this? If it means saving Hayes Textiles and honoring Dad's wishes? Yes. I met her gaze directly. The question is, will you? She didn't answer immediately, and I could see the internal struggle playing out across her features. Catherine Hayes had spent decades being the cautious counterbalance to my father's bold vision. Relinquishing that role, even partially, would require a fundamental shift in how she saw herself and her relationship to the company. I need time to think, she said finally. And we all need to consult with the board. Nothing can be decided today. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. From my mother, that counted as progress. We should meet with Parker, I suggested. Review the legal implications of Dad's trust and understand exactly what constraints we're working within. Morgan nodded in agreement. And I think we should talk to Martin Chen separately. Reassure him that we're working toward a stable leadership structure. I'll call a board meeting for Monday, my mother decided, her organizational instincts taking over. That gives us the weekend to develop a formal proposal. Just like that, we were back in business mode. 3 Hayes women planning and strategizing, the emotional undercurrents temporarily set aside in favor of practical next steps. It felt familiar and strange at the same time, like slipping on an old favorite sweater only to find it doesn't quite fit anymore. As we gathered our things to leave, Morgan touched my arm lightly. For what it's worth, I never wanted to take your place, Vanessa. I just wanted my own place at Hayes Textiles, a chance to contribute. Her sincerity was unmistakable, and I felt a twinge of guilt for how I'd characterized her motives. Perhaps I'd been so focused on my mother's betrayal that I'd failed to see my sister's genuine desire to be part of the family legacy. I know that now, I replied, meaning it, and maybe there's room for both of us after all. As I drove away from the family home, the manila envelope of documents on the passenger seat beside me, I felt oddly lighter. Nothing was resolved yet. The board meeting loomed, the details of our power-sharing arrangement remained to be negotiated, and my relationship with my mother was still fragile at best. But for the first time since that devastating meeting in the conference room, I could envision a future at Hayes Textiles that didn't require me to sacrifice my integrity or abandon my father's legacy. Whether that vision would become reality remained to be seen. But as Dad had written in his letter, some legacies were worth fighting for, and others needed to be reimagined. Perhaps Hayes Textiles could be both. The weekend passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and negotiations. Parker Williams joined us at my penthouse on Saturday morning. Legal documents spread across my dining table as we hammered out the details of a new corporate structure that would honor my father's wishes while addressing my mother's concerns. The trust is unambiguous, Parker explained, tapping the yellowed document with his pen. William intended Vanessa to have controlling interest upon turning 35. However, there's nothing that prevents you from establishing a cooperative leadership structure, provided Vanessa retains final authority over key decisions. My mother frowned at this, but Morgan nodded thoughtfully. What about creating specific domains of authority? Areas where each of us has clear decision-making power. That would work, Parker agreed. As long as Vanessa voluntarily delegates those powers rather than having them removed from her purview. Throughout the discussion, I watched my mother carefully. She remained stiff, formal, offering suggestions in clipped tones that betrayed her discomfort with the entire situation. She'd built her identity around being the practical, cautious guardian of Hayes Textiles. Ceding control, even partially, even to her daughters, clearly felt like failure to her. By Sunday afternoon, we had a framework that seemed workable. I would return as CEO, with Morgan as co-CEO. I would oversee product development, client relationships, and operations. Morgan would lead finance, legal, strategic planning, and human resources. Our mother would transition to executive board chair, retaining veto power over capital expenditures exceeding $5 million, but otherwise stepping back from day-to-day management. On paper, it looked perfect. In practice, I had my doubts. This only works if we actually communicate, I said as we reviewed the final proposal. No more secret plans or hidden agendas. We have to be honest with each other, even when it's difficult. Morgan readily agreed. Absolute transparency. I want that too. Vanessa. My mother simply nodded, her expression unreadable. Monday morning arrived with a sense of nervous anticipation. I'd called Julia the night before, asking her to prepare my office, my name back on the door, my personal items returned to their proper places. I'd dressed carefully in my power suit, a tailored charcoal jacket and pencil skirt, crimson blouse adding a pop of confident color. The message was clear. I wasn't slinking back with my tail between my legs. I was reclaiming what was rightfully mine. As I pulled into the Hayes Textiles executive parking lot, a familiar car caught my eye. David's sleek Jaguar parked in the visitors section. What was he doing here? I found out as soon as I entered the lobby. David was waiting by the reception desk, dressed impeccably in a navy suit, looking for all the world like he belonged there. "Surprise," he said, his smile warm and slightly tentative. "I thought you might appreciate some moral support today." The gesture touched me more than I could express. "How did you know about the board meeting?" "Morgan called me yesterday. Said you might be too proud to ask for backup, but that today was important." I blinked in surprise. Morgan had called David? The sister who I'd believed was trying to usurp my position had reached out to my ex-fiancé for emotional support on my behalf? That was thoughtful of her, I managed, still processing this unexpected alliance. David's smile widened. "She's not the villain in this story, Van. None of you are." He glanced at his watch. "You've got about 20 minutes before the board convenes. Want to grab coffee and strategize?" We headed to the executive break room, mercifully empty at this early hour. As David prepared 2 cups of coffee, mine with a splash of cream, no sugar, just as he remembered, I told him about our weekend negotiations and the proposed leadership structure. "It could work," he said, handing me my cup. "But only if your mother truly steps back. Will she?" That's the million-dollar question. I sipped my coffee, grateful for both the caffeine and David's steady presence. She's agreed to the arrangement, but I don't know if she can actually relinquish control. It's been her entire identity for so long. "People can change when they have to," David observed. "Especially when the alternative is losing something they value even more." "Hayes Textiles, you mean?" He shook his head slightly. "Her relationship with her daughters. Look, Vanessa, I've known your mother for a long time. She's proud, stubborn, and controlling, but she loves you and Morgan fiercely. This past week has shown her what she stands to lose if she doesn't adapt." I wished I could share his optimism. "I hope you're right. But 8 years of working with her has taught me that Catherine Hayes doesn't change course easily." "Neither does her daughter," David replied with a hint of a smile. "Must be a family trait." Before I could respond, Morgan appeared in the doorway, looking polished in a navy suit similar to David's. The sight of them together, both so put together, so conventional in their corporate attire, highlighted the differences between Morgan and me. Where she was methodical and by the book, I'd always been more intuitive, more willing to break rules and challenge conventions. Perhaps that was why Mom had always connected more easily with Morgan. They spoke the same language of careful analysis and risk mitigation. "The board members are arriving," Morgan announced. "Mom's already in the conference room reviewing the proposal with Martin." I nodded, draining my coffee cup. "Time to face the music." David squeezed my shoulder gently. "You've got this. Just remember why you're doing it. Not for your mother's approval or even for your father's legacy, but because Hayes Textiles is where you belong." His words settled something inside me, a reminder that beyond the family drama and corporate politics, I genuinely loved this company. I loved the creativity of developing new textiles, the satisfaction of seeing our products transformed into beautiful garments, the relationships with artisans and designers around the world. Whatever happened in the boardroom today, that passion remained unchanged. "Thank you for being here," I told David sincerely. "It means more than you know." "Always," he replied simply. The boardroom fell silent as I entered, followed by Morgan and David, who took a seat along the wall with other observers. All 13 board members were present, including Martin Chen, whose normally impassive face registered visible relief at seeing me. My mother sat at the head of the table, elegant, as always in a pearl gray suit, her expression carefully neutral. Vanessa, she acknowledged with a slight nod. I've briefed the board on our proposed leadership structure. They have questions. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table, the symbolism not lost on anyone. I'm happy to answer them. For the next hour, we fielded queries about the practical implementation of our co-CEO model, the division of responsibilities, and the mechanisms for resolving disagreements. Morgan and I presented a united front, seamlessly taking turns addressing different aspects of the proposal. My mother remained largely silent, intervening only when questions directly concerned her role as executive board chair. Finally, Martin Chen leaned forward, his gaze intense. This all sounds promising on paper, but I have one fundamental concern. What's changed since last week? What guarantees that this new arrangement won't dissolve into the same family conflicts that led to Vanessa's resignation? A valid question. Perhaps the most important one. I looked at Morgan, then at my mother, weighing my words carefully. What's changed is that we've acknowledged the truth, I said finally, about my father's wishes, about the ownership structure of Hayes Textiles, and about our different approaches to leadership. We've stopped pretending those differences don't exist and instead found ways to leverage them as strengths. Morgan nodded in agreement. Hayes Textiles has always balanced innovation with disciplined execution. That was the partnership our parents created. Visionary risk-taking tempered by careful analysis. Vanessa and I represent those same complementary strengths. Together, we can honor that legacy while moving the company forward. My mother cleared her throat, drawing all eyes to her. This was the moment of truth. Would she truly support this new arrangement, or undermine it with doubts and reservations? I made a mistake, she said, her voice steady despite what must have cost her to admit this publicly. In trying to protect Hayes Textiles from what I perceived as risks, I disregarded my husband's explicit wishes and damaged my relationship with my daughters. That was wrong, and I apologize. I stared at her, stunned. In 35 years, I had never heard Catherine Hayes admit a mistake so plainly, without qualifications or excuses. The arrangement before you today, she continued, represents not just a corporate restructuring but a recommitment to the vision William and I built together, bold innovation guided by sound business principles. I believe my daughters, working together, can achieve that balance better than any one of us could alone. Martin studied her for a long moment, then turned to me. And you, Vanessa? Can you commit to this partnership after everything that's happened? I met his gaze directly. I can. Not because it's easy or because all our differences are resolved, but because Hayes Textiles deserves our best efforts. My father built this company on fabric and fashion, but its true foundation was always family. I won't abandon that legacy. The vote when it came was unanimous in favor of our proposal. As board members filtered out of the room offering congratulations, I caught David's eye. He gave me a subtle thumbs up, his pride evident even from across the room. Morgan was surrounded by well-wishers, graciously deflecting praise to include me in every acknowledgement. Only my mother remained seated, her hands folded neatly on the table before her. When the room had emptied except for the three of us, she finally spoke. Well, she said softly, William would be pleased. It wasn't quite an olive branch, but it was something. An acknowledgement that perhaps, in the end, my father had been right about what Hayes Textiles needed. About what I was capable of. As Morgan and I left the boardroom together, heading toward what would now be our shared executive suite, I felt a curious mixture of triumph and trepidation. We had won this battle, secured our rightful places in the company. But the real work, rebuilding trust, establishing new patterns of communication, truly learning to lead together, was just beginning. The first month of our co-CEO arrangement passed in a whirlwind of activity. Morgan and I established adjoining offices with a connecting door that remained pointedly open during business hours, a physical manifestation of our commitment to transparency. We held joint meetings with department heads, presented a united front to clients and suppliers, and carefully navigated the minefield of employee concerns about the new leadership structure. On the surface, everything was going smoothly. Too smoothly, perhaps. The tensions that had erupted so dramatically a month ago hadn't disappeared. They'd simply gone underground, manifesting in subtle ways that were harder to address. My mother kept her word about stepping back from day-to-day operations, but her influence lingered in the cautious glances department heads would exchange when I proposed something bold. Morgan never directly contradicted me in meetings, but I often found her quietly revising my proposals afterward, adding layers of analysis and contingency planning that sometimes diluted their impact. And I wasn't blameless either. I found myself bypassing proper channels when I was excited about a new design concept, engaging directly with the product development team rather than following the protocols Morgan had carefully established. I made decisions on the fly during client meetings without consulting her, justifying it as necessary responsiveness rather than the end run around shared authority that it was. We were trying, all three of us, but old habits die hard. The real test came when a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity landed unexpectedly in our laps. Aria Laurent, the legendary French fashion designer whose creations defined luxury for a generation, was planning her final collection before retirement. Her team reached out to Hayes Textiles about creating a custom sustainable fabric that would combine traditional luxury with environmental consciousness, exactly the niche we'd been developing since I took over 8 years ago. This could redefine our brand positioning, I told Morgan excitedly, pacing around her meticulously organized office. Aria Laurent's final collection using Hayes Textiles exclusively? The press alone would be worth millions. Morgan looked up from her computer, where she'd been reviewing the preliminary terms. It's an incredible opportunity, she agreed, but the timeline is extremely aggressive. 6 weeks for development, testing, and production? That's pushing the limits of what our facilities can handle. We'd need to postpone the Richardson and Miyazaki orders, I acknowledged. But I've already spoken with them, and they're willing to accept a 2-week delay with a 10% discount. Morgan's eyebrow arched slightly. You've already spoken with them? When was this decided? I felt a familiar defensiveness rise. The Laurent team only called this morning. I needed to check the feasibility before bringing it to you. That's not how this works, Vanessa. Major client prioritization decisions are supposed to be made jointly. There wasn't time, I countered. The Laurent team needed an initial response today, Morgan sighed, removing her reading glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose. This is exactly the kind of impulsive decision-making Mom warned about. You're rearranging our entire production schedule based on a phone call, without proper analysis of the financial implications. Sometimes opportunities don't wait for committee meetings and spreadsheets, Morgan. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface of our careful politeness finally bubbled over. I'm not asking for a committee meeting, she said, her voice tight. I'm asking for the basic professional courtesy of consultation before you commit our company to a high-risk project with razor-thin margins. High risk? This is Aria Laurent we're talking about. Her endorsement would transform our market position overnight. At what cost? Have you calculated the overtime expenses? The potential penalties if we miss the Laurent deadline after delaying our other clients? The impact on our cash flow? I hadn't, of course. That wasn't how I operated. I saw opportunities, possibilities, connections, not spreadsheets and risk assessments. That was supposed to be Morgan's contribution. That's why we're co-CEOs, I said, trying to keep my tone reasonable. You handle the financial analysis, I handle the creative vision and client relationships. Except you've already made commitments, without giving me a chance to do my part, Morgan pointed out. That's not a collaboration, Vanessa. That's you operating exactly as you did before, with me scrambling to make your vision financially viable afterward. She was right, and we both knew it. I'd paid lip service to our shared leadership model while continuing to make unilateral decisions when it suited me. The realization was uncomfortable. Before I could respond, a knock at the door interrupted us. It was Julia, looking hesitant. Sorry to interrupt, but Ms. Hayes, Catherine, is here. She says she received an urgent call from Aria Laurent's office. Morgan and I exchanged alarmed glances. Why would Laurent be calling our mother? We found her waiting in the conference room, impeccably dressed as always, her expression giving nothing away. Mother, I said cautiously. Julia mentioned a call from Laurent? Yes, she replied, studying us both carefully. Aria called me directly, quite concerned. It seems she received conflicting messages from Hayes Textiles today. One call enthusiastically accepting her project and rearranging our production schedule to accommodate it, and another email expressing reservations about the timeline and requesting additional negotiations. I felt my cheeks burn as Morgan stiffened beside me. You contacted Laurent separately? I asked her. After our discussion, yes. I thought it prudent to clarify that we needed time to assess feasibility before making firm commitments. My mother looked between us, her expression softening slightly. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Two leaders, two different approaches, creating confusion for our most important potential client. We're still adjusting to the co-CEO model, Morgan said diplomatically. There are bound to be some communication issues at first. Perhaps, my mother allowed. But Aria Laurent isn't interested in our internal adjustment period. She needs a clear, unified response. Either Hayes Textiles can meet her requirements, or she'll take her collection to Milan. The threat hung in the air between us. Losing the Laurent opportunity would be devastating, not just financially, but as a statement about our company's capabilities and direction. What did you tell her? I asked my mother. I said I would consult with our leadership team and provide a definitive answer by the close of business today. Our leadership team. Not my daughters, or even our CEOs. The careful phrasing wasn't lost on me. Despite the board's decision, despite the new organizational chart, my mother still saw herself as the ultimate authority at Hayes Textiles. And in this moment of crisis, I couldn't entirely blame her. Morgan and I had failed our first significant test of shared leadership, reverting to our separate approaches at the first sign of pressure. We need to align quickly, Morgan said, her practical nature asserting itself. I've run preliminary numbers on the Laurent project. With some adjustments to overtime allocations and a reorganization of the production schedule, we can make it work. But the margins will be tight, and the risk of missing deadlines is real. I nodded, acknowledging her analysis. The creative opportunity is extraordinary. Laurent's final collection will be archived in fashion museums, studied by design students for decades. Having Hayes Textiles associated with that legacy is worth the financial stretch. My mother glanced between us, a flicker of something like hope crossing her features. So what is our answer to Aria? Morgan and I looked at each other, a moment of silent communication passing between us. For perhaps the first time since our new arrangement began, I truly considered my sister's perspective, not as an obstacle to overcome, but as a valuable counterbalance to my own tendencies. We accept the project, I said. With modified terms, Morgan added. 8 weeks instead of 6, with a phased delivery schedule that prioritizes her showcase pieces. And we offer exclusive sustainable textiles for her entire collection, not just the featured garments. I continued, building on Morgan's suggestion. That expands the scope, but gives us more flexibility on timing. A 25% deposit up front to offset the overtime and rescheduling costs, Morgan concluded. My mother nodded slowly, a reluctant smile forming. That actually sounds like a reasonable plan. One that balances opportunity with pragmatism. It was the closest thing to approval I'd heard from her in years. Not effusive praise. Catherine Hayes wasn't capable of that. But genuine acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, our complementary approaches could work together after all. As my mother left to call Aria with our unified proposal, Morgan turned to me, her expression serious. "This can't happen again, Vanessa. We can't keep undermining each other and forcing Mom to referee. That defeats the entire purpose of our new structure." "I know," I admitted. "I shouldn't have approached the clients without consulting you first. That was wrong. And I shouldn't have sent that email without discussing it with you," she conceded. We both fell back into old patterns. Old patterns. That was exactly it. Despite our best intentions, we'd spent years establishing certain ways of operating, me as the impulsive visionary, Morgan as the careful analyst, our mother as the ultimate authority. Changing those ingrained behaviors would take more than organizational charts and board approvals. "We need a better system," I said, thinking aloud. "Clear protocols for how decisions get made, especially in time-sensitive situations." Morgan nodded. "And regular check-ins, just the two of us, away from the office. Somewhere we can speak freely without worrying about office politics or Mom's influence." It was a start. Not a solution to all our problems, but an acknowledgement that maintaining our co-leadership would require intentional effort and constant vigilance against our worst tendencies. As we walked back to our offices, I felt cautiously optimistic. The Laurent crisis had exposed the flaws in our arrangement, but it had also demonstrated the potential strength of our combined approach. Perhaps there was a middle path between my father's bold vision and my mother's careful pragmatism, a path that Morgan and I could forge together if we were willing to keep trying. 3 months into our co-CEO arrangement, Hayes Textiles hummed with renewed energy. The Laurent collection was in full production, with our sustainable luxury fabrics drawing praise from fashion critics worldwide. Our modified terms had proven prescient. The extra 2 weeks had been necessary to perfect the signature textile that would define Aria's legacy collection. Morgan and I had settled into a rhythm that, while not perfect, was increasingly functional. Our twice-weekly sister summits, held over breakfast at a small cafe well away from both the office and our mother's scrutiny, had become a sacred space for honest communication. We'd established protocols for decision-making that played to our respective strengths while ensuring neither of us felt sidelined. "Quarterly numbers are in," Morgan announced one morning, sliding a folder across the cafe table. "We're up 12% over projections." I glanced at the figures while sipping my latte. "The Laurent effect already?" "Partly, but also the operational efficiencies you implemented in the Portland facility. Reducing waste by 15% went straight to the bottom line." I smiled at her acknowledgement of my contribution. 3 months ago, she might have attributed our success entirely to careful financial planning, her domain. This recognition of my operational decisions represented genuine progress. "The board meeting tomorrow should be painless then," I observed. Morgan's expression turned guarded. "About that. There's something we need to discuss before we face the board. And Mom." I set down my cup, instantly alert. "What is it?" "I've been reviewing Dad's original expansion plans from before he died. The Asia-Pacific strategy you partially implemented during your first years as CEO. The one Mom always opposed was too aggressive," I recalled. "I scaled it back significantly after she threatened to veto the entire initiative." Morgan nodded. "I know. But looking at the data now, with 8 years of performance metrics, Dad was right, Vanessa. His instincts about the Asian luxury market were spot on. If we'd followed his complete vision, we'd likely be double our current size." I stared at her, stunned. This admission, that our father's bold approach had been correct, that my mother's caution had actually limited our growth, was the last thing I'd expected from Morgan. "Does Mom know you've reached this conclusion?" "Not yet." Morgan fidgeted with her napkin. "I'm still working on how to present it to her. The Shanghai facility has been so successful that I believe we should accelerate." Expansion into South Korea and Japan, following Dad's original blueprint. But Mom will see it as a repudiation of her business philosophy, I finished for her. As for us choosing Dad's approach over hers, exactly. I sat back, processing this development. For years, I'd pushed against my mother's excessive caution, advocating for bolder moves while she consistently pulled me back. Having Morgan, who had always aligned with our mother's conservative approach, now supporting my father's vision was a vindication I'd never anticipated. We need to present it together, I said finally. Not as Dad's plan versus Mom's fears, but as a data-driven strategy that balances opportunity with calculated risk. Your analysis, my market relationships. Morgan relaxed visibly. That's what I was hoping you'd say. I've prepared the financial models, but I need your insights on implementation timelines and client development strategies. We spent the next hour sketching out our approach, merging Morgan's detailed analysis with my on-the-ground knowledge of Asian markets. By the time we left the cafe, we had a solid proposal that acknowledged our mother's legitimate concerns, while making a compelling case for accelerated expansion. What we couldn't prepare for was the personal dynamics that would complicate the board meeting the following day. The conference room buzzed with positive energy as board members reviewed our quarterly results. Martin Chen seemed particularly pleased, having doubled down on his investment after our leadership restructuring. Impressive numbers, he commented, nodding to both Morgan and me. The co-CEO model appears to be working remarkably well. My mother sat silently at the head of the table, her expression inscrutable as various board members echoed Martin's praise. I couldn't help wondering if she felt sidelined by our success, if each positive comment about our leadership felt like an implicit criticism of her previous opposition. When it came time to present our expansion proposal, Morgan took the lead. A strategic decision we'd made to emphasize that this wasn't just another of my impulsive ideas. As you can see from the projections, she concluded after a detailed presentation, accelerating our Asia-Pacific expansion according to this modified version of my father's original strategy offers significant growth potential with manageable risk profiles. Several board members nodded appreciatively. Martin looked particularly intrigued. Only my mother remained stone-faced, her fingers lightly drumming on the table. Questions? Morgan asked, glancing nervously in our mother's direction. I have one, my mother said, her voice deceptively calm. When exactly did you plan to consult me about resurrecting William's expansion plan? The very plan I consistently advised against because of its exposure to currency fluctuations and regulatory uncertainties? The room feels uncomfortably silent. Morgan looked to me for support, and I stepped in smoothly. We're presenting it now, Mother, for full board consideration, including yours. This isn't Dad's original plan. It's a modified approach that incorporates the lessons we've learned from Shanghai while addressing the specific concerns you raised years ago. Is that so? My mother's gaze was penetrating, because from where I sit, it looks remarkably like you've won Morgan over to your father's high-risk philosophy and are now presenting me with a fait accompli. Morgan flushed. That's not fair, Mom. I've spent weeks analyzing the data. This recommendation comes from objective financial assessment, not family loyalty. Nothing about this company has ever been purely objective, my mother replied sharply. Not when William was alive, and certainly not now. The undercurrents of decades of marital disagreements about business strategy hung heavy in the air. I could almost see my father's ghost in the room, his bold vision still battling my mother's caution 8 years after his death. Martin Chen cleared his throat. Perhaps we could focus on the specific proposal at hand. The financial projections appear sound, and the phased approach mitigates many of the risks Catherine has historically been concerned about. My mother straightened, visibly gathering her composure. Of course, forgive my personal reaction. Let's examine the details. For the next hour, we walked through every aspect of the expansion plan. My mother's questions were pointed, challenging, forcing Morgan and me to defend each assumption and contingency. But I noticed something interesting as the discussion progressed. Her resistance seemed less absolute than in previous years. She was actually listening to our answers, considering our perspectives rather than dismissing them outright. When the final vote came, the board approved our proposal unanimously, including my mother's reluctant yes. As the meeting concluded and board members filed out, my mother remained seated, her gaze fixed on some middle distance. Morgan and I exchanged glances, silently debating whether to approach her or give her space. Before we could decide, she spoke. "He would be proud of you both," she said quietly. "William always said the company would reach its full potential when his daughters learned to combine their strengths." The admission seemed to cost her something, as though acknowledging our father's prescience diminished her own contributions. "Somehow, we couldn't have built on his vision without your foundation," I said carefully. "The financial discipline you instilled is what makes these expansions possible." She looked up at me, surprise flickering across her features. After years of battling her caution, my acknowledgement of its value seemed to catch her off guard. "Perhaps," she conceded, "though I may have been excessively cautious at times." From Catherine Hayes, this was the equivalent of a dramatic mea culpa. Morgan and I tried to hide our shock. "We all bring different strengths to the table," Morgan offered diplomatically. "That's why the three of us together make Hayes Textiles what it is." My mother studied us both for a long moment, then rose with characteristic grace. "I have a lunch appointment. We'll discuss implementation details tomorrow." As she left, I turned to Morgan. "Did that just happen? Did Mom actually admit she might have been wrong about something?" Morgan smiled slightly. "I think it's less about right and wrong, and more about her realizing that opposing Dad's vision isn't the same as honoring his memory." It was an insightful observation that revealed how much Morgan had matured in recent months. She was no longer simply our mother's ally or my competitor. She had developed her own perspective, her own understanding of our complex family dynamics. As we gathered our materials and headed back to our offices, I felt a cautious optimism growing. The expansion plan's approval was a significant business victory, but the subtle shift in our mother's attitude represented something potentially more valuable: the beginning of a true healing in our family's fractured relationships. Perhaps, as my father had always believed, Hayes Textiles could be more than just a successful company. Perhaps it could still become the legacy that united us, rather than the battleground that divided us. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. The Asia-Pacific expansion moved forward with remarkable smoothness, Morgan's meticulous planning complementing my relationship building in the region. The Laurent collection launched to international acclaim, with Hayes Textiles featured prominently in every review and interview. Our sustainable luxury fabrics were suddenly the must-have material for high-end designers worldwide. Success had a way of easing tensions. My mother, while still maintaining her role as executive board chair, had gradually relaxed her grip on day-to-day decisions. She'd even taken a 3-week vacation to Italy, her first real break in decades, returning tanned and noticeably more relaxed. Morgan and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm, our complementary strengths creating a leadership dynamic that employees had come to respect and even admire. The sister summits continued, though they'd evolved from tense strategy sessions to more balanced discussions about both business and personal matters. It was during one of these breakfasts that Morgan surprised me with an unexpected question. "Have you spoken to David recently?" I nearly choked on my croissant. David and I had maintained a careful friendship since his intervention 6 months ago, occasionally meeting for dinner or exchanging texts about industry news. But we'd both been cautious, neither wanting to complicate the already complex situation at Hayes Textiles with a rekindled romance. "We had dinner last week," I admitted. "Why do you ask?" Morgan stirred her tea thoughtfully. "I ran into him at the Textile Innovation Conference in Chicago. He mentioned he's considering a position with Eastland Group. I set down my coffee cup, genuinely surprised. In London? He hasn't said anything to me about that. I got the impression it's still preliminary, Morgan said carefully. But it would be a significant opportunity for him. Global head of financial strategy for their entire conglomerate. The news shouldn't have affected me as strongly as it did. David and I had been apart for years. He had every right to pursue career opportunities anywhere in the world. Yet the thought of him moving to London created an unexpected hollow feeling in my chest. It would be a good move for him, I said, aiming for a neutral tone. Morgan studied me with an unnerving perception. But not for you. David and I aren't together, Morgan. We haven't been for a long time. And yet he's the first person you call when you have news, good or bad. He dropped everything to support you during the leadership crisis. And you light up whenever his name is mentioned. I frowned at my sister. Since when are you so interested in my love life? Since I realized that both of us have been using Hayes Textiles as an excuse to avoid actually living, she replied with surprising candor. I've been hiding behind degrees and professional achievements. You've been hiding behind saving the company and honoring Dad's legacy. Neither of us has made much room for personal happiness. Her insight was uncomfortably accurate. For years, I'd used the demands of rebuilding Hayes Textiles as a shield against vulnerability, against the messy complexities of relationships. Even my broken engagement to David had been justified as a necessary sacrifice for the company's survival. It's complicated, I said finally. David and I have history, baggage. Everyone has baggage, Vanessa. The question is whether what you might build together is worth the risk of unpacking it. I stared at my normally pragmatic sister, wondering when she'd become so philosophical about relationships. What's brought this on? Have you been reading self-help books? Morgan's cheeks colored slightly. Actually, I've been seeing someone for about 2 months now. What? Who? I couldn't mask my shock. Morgan had always been intensely private about her personal life, focusing on career advancement to the exclusion of almost everything else. His name is Gabriel Chen. He's an architectural engineer I met during the facility planning for the Seoul expansion. Chen, as in related to Martin Chen? She nodded. His nephew. And before you ask, yes, Martin knows, and no, there's no conflict of interest. Gabriel's firm isn't directly involved with Hayes Textiles. I processed this revelation, realizing how little attention I'd paid to my sister's life outside work. While we'd made progress in our professional relationship, I'd failed to notice significant developments in her personal life. I'm happy for you, I said, meaning it. Gabriel must be pretty special to break through your workaholic defenses. Morgan smiled, a genuine warmth I rarely saw from her. He is. And that's my point, Vanessa. For years, I watched you pour everything into Hayes Textiles, sacrificing your relationship with David, any semblance of work-life balance. I thought that was what success required. Now I'm realizing there has to be more. Her words resonated uncomfortably. The truth was, despite our professional success, perhaps even because of it, a growing emptiness had been gnawing at me. Hayes Textiles was thriving, our family relationships were healing, yet something fundamental was missing from my life. I'll talk to David, I said finally, about London, about everything. Morgan squeezed my hand briefly, an unusual gesture of physical affection from my typically reserved sister. Good. Because another thing I've learned recently, happiness shouldn't be postponed indefinitely. The opportunity to follow through on this promise came sooner than expected. That evening, as I was reviewing design samples for our spring collection in my penthouse, my doorbell rang. David stood outside, hands in his pockets, looking uncharacteristically nervous. I brought Thai food, he said, holding up a familiar paper bag. And news. My heart sank. So Morgan had been right about London. I ushered him in, clearing design, samples from my dining table to make room for the food. For a few minutes, we engaged in comfortable small talk. Updates on mutual friends, industry gossip, the unseasonably warm weather, but the unspoken hung heavy between us. Finally, as we finished eating, David took a deep breath. "I've been offered a position with Eastland Group." "In London," I supplied. "Morgan mentioned she ran into you at the Chicago conference." He nodded, looking slightly relieved that he didn't have to break the news cold. "It's an incredible opportunity. Global scope, significant resources, the chance to shape financial strategy across multiple industries. It sounds perfect for you," I said, working to keep my voice even. "When would you start?" "That's the thing." David leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I haven't accepted yet. I wanted to talk to you first." "Me? Why?" The question came out more abruptly than I'd intended. Because despite everything, the breakup, the years apart, all of it, you're still the most important person in my life, Vanessa. And the thought of moving to London, of building a life there without you in it, it doesn't feel right. The raw honesty in his voice pierced through the careful barriers I'd constructed around my heart. "What are you saying, David?" "I'm saying I still love you. I never stopped. And before I make a decision about London, I need to know if there's any chance for us. Not just now, but long term." The question hung in the air between us, forcing me to confront feelings I'd kept carefully compartmentalized for years. The timing was almost eerily perfect, coming just hours after Morgan's pointed observations about my avoidance of personal happiness. "Hayes Textiles is finally stable," I said slowly, thinking aloud. "Morgan and I have found a workable balance. Mom is actually taking vacations. For the first time in 8 years, the company doesn't need me to be there every waking moment." Hope flickered in David's eyes. "Is that a roundabout way of saying you might consider a relationship that requires occasional trips to London?" "It's a roundabout way of saying I've been hiding behind work to avoid facing how I still feel about you," I admitted. "And maybe it's time to stop hiding." His smile was cautious but genuine. "And how do you feel, Vanessa?" I took a deep breath, finally allowing myself to voice the truth I'd been avoiding for years. "I love you too. I never stopped either. Breaking our engagement was the biggest mistake I've ever made, even if I convinced myself it was necessary at the time." The relief on his face was palpable. "So where does that leave us? Because Eastland wants an answer by next week." It was a pivotal moment, not just for our relationship, but for the life I wanted to build beyond Hayes Textiles. For 8 years, every decision had been filtered through the lens of what was best for the company. What would honor my father's legacy? Perhaps it was finally time to consider what would honor my own needs, my own future. "It leaves us with options," I said, reaching for his hand across the table. "Maybe you take the London position, and I split my time between there and here. Or maybe you stay, and we build something together locally. Or maybe there's a third option we haven't considered yet." "The logistics don't matter as much as the commitment," David said, squeezing my hand. "Are we doing this? Really trying again?" The old fear flickered briefly. What if Hayes Textiles needed me and I wasn't fully present? What if I couldn't balance professional responsibilities with personal happiness? But Morgan's words from breakfast echoed in my mind. Happiness shouldn't be postponed indefinitely. "Yes," I said firmly. "We're really doing this, whatever it takes." As David pulled me into his arms, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with business success or family legacy. This was about my life, my future, my heart. And for the first time in years, I was choosing based on what I wanted, not what the company needed. Hayes Textiles would always be part of me, the embodiment of my father's vision and my own accomplishments, but it no longer needed to be all of me. That realization felt like the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't even known I was solving. 1 year after that fateful day when my mother had announced Morgan would take over as CEO, I stood on the expansive rooftop terrace of Hayes Textiles, newly opened Seoul headquarters, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in hues of gold and pink. The journey to this moment had been anything but linear, filled with betrayal, reconciliation, painful truths, and unexpected alliances. "Beautiful view," David said, joining me at the railing and handing me a glass of champagne. "Though I'm not sure it beats London in the fall." I smiled, leaning into his warmth. Our compromise had worked better than either of us had anticipated. David had accepted the position with Eastland Group, but negotiated a hybrid arrangement that allowed him to split his time between London and our home base. I'd adjusted my role at Hayes Textiles to accommodate regular trips to London, while Morgan skillfully managed operations during my absences. "Different beauty," I replied. "Seoul is all innovation and forward momentum. London has history and tradition." "Much like the Hayes sisters," he observed with a knowing smile. The comparison wasn't inaccurate. Over the past year, Morgan and I had refined our co-CEO dynamic into something that genuinely worked. Her analytical precision balancing my intuitive risk-taking, her attention to detail complementing my big-picture vision. What had begun as a forced arrangement had evolved into a genuine partnership that leveraged our respective strengths. The rooftop door opened, and Morgan emerged with Gabriel Chen by her side. The architectural engineer had become a permanent fixture in my sister's life, his quiet creativity drawing out a softer side of Morgan that few had ever witnessed. Behind them came my mother, elegant as always, though the past year had softened her somehow. The severe buns replaced by a stylish bob, her wardrobe occasionally featuring colors beyond her usual monochromatic palette. "The investors are impressed," Morgan reported, joining us at the railing. "Particularly with the sustainable manufacturing processes. Martin thinks we'll exceed our 5-year projections by at least 15%. "Just don't tell him I said so," my mother added with uncharacteristic humor. "But your father's Asia-Pacific vision was brilliant. The market was ready for exactly what Hayes Textiles offers." The casual acknowledgement of my father's business acumen, once a source of tension and rivalry, now flowed naturally from my mother. Time and success had healed many wounds, allowing her to recognize his contributions without feeling diminished by them. "To William Hayes," David proposed, raising his glass, "whose vision brought us here." "And to Catherine Hayes," I added deliberately, "whose foundation made that vision possible." My mother's eyes widened slightly at the acknowledgement, a fleeting vulnerability crossing her features before she composed herself. She nodded in appreciation, clinking her glass against mine. As the others moved away to greet arriving guests, I found myself alone with my mother, watching the Seoul skyline transition from sunset to twinkling evening lights. "I received an interesting call yesterday," she said casually, "from Aria Laurent." "Oh?" I tried to sound nonchalant, though my pulse quickened. Aria's final collection using our fabrics had been an unparalleled success, establishing Hayes Textiles as the premier name in sustainable luxury textiles. She's establishing a fashion institute in Paris, wants to create a program specifically focused on sustainable textile innovation. My mother glanced at me sideways. She asked if I might consider joining the advisory board. "That's quite an honor," I said, genuinely pleased for her. "Will you accept?" "I'm considering it." She turned to face the view again. It would mean spending significant time in Paris. The implication hung silently between us. After 40 years of unwavering dedication to Hayes Textiles, my mother was contemplating a new chapter, one that would take her away from daily involvement in the company she'd helped build. "Morgan, and I can handle things here," I said softly. "If that's what you're worried about." "I know you can." The simple statement contained volumes: trust, respect, acknowledgement. "That's not what I'm worried about." "Then what?" She was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. William dedicated his life to building Hayes Textiles, to creating a legacy that would unite our family across generations. When he died, I felt responsible for preserving that legacy exactly as he left it, as if changing anything would somehow diminish his memory. I remained silent, sensing she needed to express something long held inside. But watching you and Morgan this past year, taking his vision and adapting it, expanding it, making it your own, I've realized that legacies aren't static monuments. They're living things that grow and evolve. She turned to me, her expression uncharacteristically open. Your father would be so proud of what you've built here, Vanessa. Not because you followed his blueprint exactly, but because you had the courage to reimagine it. The words touched something deep inside me, a wound I hadn't realized was still healing. For years, I'd carried the weight of my father's legacy, measuring every decision against what I thought he would have wanted. My mother's acknowledgement felt like permission to finally define success on my own terms. He'd be proud of all of us, I said, meaning it, including you, Mom, especially you. She smiled faintly, a rare moment of genuine warmth between us. Perhaps it's time for me to build something beyond Hayes Textiles, to see what I'm capable of outside William's shadow. The Laurent Institute would be lucky to have you, I said sincerely. And Paris is just a short flight from London. David. And I could visit often. The mention of David brought another small smile to her lips. Your father always liked him, you know. Said David was the only man who wasn't intimidated by your brilliance. This was news to me. Dad talked to you about David? Of course. We may have disagreed about business strategy, but we were aligned on what mattered most, our daughter's happiness. She glanced across the terrace to where David stood chatting with Gabriel and Morgan. I'm glad you found your way back to each other. Before I could respond, Martin Chen approached, apologizing for the interruption, but needing my mother's input on a question from the Japanese investors. As she moved away, I took a moment to absorb the magnitude of our conversation. My mother, who had fought so hard to maintain control of Hayes Textiles, was willingly stepping back, not out of defeat, but out of recognition that the company was in good hands, that her daughters had earned the right to lead in their own way. David rejoined me, slipping an arm around my waist. Everything okay? You look contemplative. Better than okay, I replied, leaning into him. Just thinking about how much has changed in a year. From being pushed out of the company to co-CEO, with a thriving personal life, he teased. Not bad for 12 months' work. I laughed, but my thoughts were more serious. A year ago, I'd been defined almost entirely by Hayes Textiles, by my role as my father's successor, by the responsibility of preserving his legacy. Now, while the company remained a vital part of my identity, it no longer encompassed all of who I was or what I valued. Morgan approached, champagne in hand. The Minister of Trade wants to meet you, she informed me. Apparently, she's considering a national sustainable textile initiative and wants Hayes' expertise. I'll be right there, I promised. As Morgan walked away, David pressed a kiss to my temple. Duty calls, CEO Hayes. I smiled, taking a final moment to appreciate the view, not just of Seoul's skyline, but of how far we'd all come. My mother, finding identity beyond her husband's company. Morgan, balancing her analytical nature with newfound emotional openness. Myself, learning that honoring my father's legacy didn't require sacrificing my own happiness. Actually, I corrected, gently, it's co-CEO Hayes. The best decisions we've made this year have been together, not alone. 8 years ago, when I'd returned to save my father's struggling company, I'd believed I had to do it all myself, carry the full weight of his legacy on my shoulders alone. Now I understood what he had perhaps known all along, that Hayes Textiles was never meant to be shouldered by any one person. Its true strength lay in the combination of our different perspectives, the balance of innovation and tradition, risk and caution vision, and practicality. In growing my mother's business to $90 million, I hadn't just built a successful company. I'd helped forge a new kind of family legacy, one defined not by individual achievement, but by our capacity to unite our distinctive strengths toward a common purpose. And that, I reflected as I moved to join Morgan and meet the minister, was a legacy truly worth building. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.